There's no question, South Carolina's rush defense has not been good enough over the past couple of years, but I think there's one particular change that could serve them well in 2023.
Our Locked On Gamecocks, your daily podcast on the South Carolina Gamecocks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Gamecock Nation, and welcome back to the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, your show for the latest headlines and potential storylines on South Carolina Gamecock athletics. I'm Andrew Lyon, the host of this podcast, and also a staff writer for GamecocksDigest over on SI.com. Thank you for making Locked On Gamecocks your first listen or watch here today. We are free and available on YouTube and also wherever you get your audio podcasts daily. South Carolina's football program obviously has been progressing in terms of their overall win-loss record in the first couple years of Shane Beamer's tenure here. But heading into 2023, there's still some issues on both sides of the ball that this coaching staff and the players obviously would like to rectify. And in terms of South Carolina's defense, the biggest issue so far in Shane Beamer's tenure at South Carolina has been the rush defense. And because of that, and potentially some of the different ways in which this coaching staff could try to tinker with the Gamecocks defense in this offseason, I think South Carolina is going to change how the defense is employed schematically in 2023. Now, before I get into just what I think that change is going to be, I want to play a quick clip of Shane Beamer talking to the media back on March 21st and his overall response regarding how he and the coaching staff are trying to prioritize making some changes to a rush defense that, again, has seen plenty of struggles in his first 2 years as the head coach of South Carolina.
Yeah, no, I think we always look at how to be better, and you look at your personnel for sure. And you know, we've always been multiple on defense, and there were times last year where we played with 5 defensive linemen in normal situations. There were times last year where we were more of a 3-down defense, 3-4, 3-3, whatever you want to call it. So we've always had the ability to be multiple, and that is getting our best players on the field. So going back to your question, let's figure out who our best 11 are, figure out how to get them on the field, and then everything is on the table for sure. And a lot of that too is run defense is critical. We're not going to get to where we want to go as a program if we don't stop the run. I think Clemson won the ACC, Georgia won the SEC, Utah won the Pac-12, and Michigan, I believe, won the Big Ten, and all 4 of those teams were in the top 18 in the nation last year in run defense. So there's 4 of your 5 Power 5 conference champions, and they're all best in the country at stopping the run. So we got to stop the run better than what we did, and that's all 11 too. That's not just D-line and linebackers. That's our defensive backs. We involve our defensive backs in the run defense and run fits, and they got to be in the right place, and they got to make tackles, and a lot of that is plays on the perimeter and things like that as well. So it's a huge emphasis. We're continuing to emphasize it and coach it better. But yeah, everything's on the table.
So there's a couple of specific quotes that stuck out to me from that video clip of Shane Beamer talking about the Gamecocks rush defense. Firstly, what he said about South Carolina's not going to get where they want to go as a program if they can't stop the run. That is a clear indicator right there, obviously, that Shane Beamer recognizes how much of a problem this has been so far, again, during his time at South Carolina. It's something that if they do want to reach even bigger heights in terms of, again, their end results during each season, then they have to get this corrected. And then the other part where he says, quote, everything is on the table. Now, admittedly, there's a lot of times where some coaches will use this as just pure coach speak when it comes to addressing a particular issue or problem that is maybe brought up to them by the media. But when listening to Shane Beamer talk about the rush defense in this particular clip, I don't think that he's just saying this just to give the media members something to write about or talk about. I really think that he means it, that legitimately everything is on the table. So let's get into what I think could happen therefore, with this defense in 2023? What kind of change could the staff make in order to try to offset some of the issues they've had in rush defense? There's one big change I think they'll make schematically. I think that this coaching staff is going to employ more of a 3-3-5 look in their defense without getting rid of the multiplicity of their defense. Now, the Gamecocks obviously have been a base 4-2-5 or nickel defense throughout the time that Clayton White has been their defensive coordinator. This past season, with a little bit more experience and obviously a little bit better depth at certain spots, the Gamecocks started to employ a lot more different formations, different looks, like a 3-2-6 formation, and at times 3-3-5. There were even some times where they ran a 5-2 formation with 5 defensive linemen on the line of scrimmage. So South Carolina is not afraid to use different formations, but obviously, despite the multiplicity, and again, despite some of the talent that they had and some of the depth they had this past season, things did not really work out that well. They actually were worse statistically in terms of rushing yards allowed per game and yards allowed per carry, both of which were the second worst mark in the SEC. They did have some significant injuries, of course, on defense, but again, the depth was better across the board for the most part, except for maybe the defensive end spot. And they were in Clayton White's system for the second year in a row, yet they did not seemingly progress from a statistical standpoint. So I think that this 3-3-5 look could be used by South Carolina because of a couple different reasons. Firstly, I think that South Carolina's linebacker room is much deeper than people realize. I think the Gamecocks legitimately go 7 deep at this position with guys like Muhammad Kaba, Grayson Pup-Howard, who of course they've brought in as a part of their 2023 recruiting class. Stone Blanton now is no longer a freshman. Debo Williams will be heading into his 3rd year as an SEC linebacker. Those guys are going to lead the charge. But you've also got guys like a Bam Martin Scott. You got a Donovan Westmoreland. You've also got a Jerron Willis, the athletic transfer out of Ole Miss. So the linebacker room, they've got the numbers to run more 3 linebacker sets. The interior defensive line is really deep. That position group goes 6 deep with guys like Tonka Hemingway, Boogie Huntley, TJ Sanders, Nick Barrett, Elijah Davis, and Xavier McLeod, another 2023 signee. And of course, the biggest sort of X factor here with a potential schematic change in terms of what formations are run is the edge position, because right now, this spot is still a serious question mark in terms of depth and experience, because besides Jordan Stratton, who's again coming off of a torn ACL injury from this past season, there's not a whole lot behind him in terms of proven SEC depth. Desmond Umeozulu is a true freshman. Tyree Johnson has been plagued with injuries throughout his career. Brian Thomas Jr. got some valuable snaps last year, but not as much as some of these other guys. And then Desmond Umeozulu has a lot of promise, a lot of talent. But y'all, he's a true freshman. It is hard to make an impact in the SEC as a true freshman when it comes to the trenches. So I think that essentially the nickel defense is not going to be completely scrapped. I think that formation is still going to be there. But I think that for situations that will allow this defensive coaching staff to run more of a 3-3-5 formation, I do think you will see a lot more of that in 2023. And again, they've got multiple things that they could do here. They could move Tonka Hemingway and Elijah Davis out to those maybe 4-eye defensive end spots, sort of shaded on the inside half of the offensive tackles. Boogie Huntley could also maybe play out there. Nick Barrett could be your nose tackle. And you could see formations with Debo Williams, Stone Blanton, and Muhammad Kaba, or maybe a Grayson Pup-Howard, all on the field at the same time. The Gamecocks do have options here. And with what all's going on at the edge position right now, they should not just completely subscribe to running a 4-2-5 base defense just because it's what they've been running all along. And it seems like, again, that Shane Beamer and the staff have recognized this, and they're going to tinker with this some as they go throughout spring practice and, of course, especially fall camp heading into 2023. Now, due to some of the depth issues on the defensive line, South Carolina is looking to bring in a couple of portal players, and they've made no bones about that. And there's one particular player that could back up the notion that maybe the Gamecocks could run more of a 3-3-5 defense this next year, a transfer particularly out of Maryland. And we'll dive into that player in just a couple moments right here on Locked On Gamecocks. Today's show is brought to you by Built Bar. Now, March Madness has pretty much ended, so now's the time to go and see how you performed in terms of Built's March Madness bracket. So go to www.builtmarchmadness.com to see how your favorite did at the end. Again, I picked cookie dough chunk puffs to go all the way and win, and I haven't checked recently, but I'm pretty sure, of course, that it made it at least to probably the Final Four, because, again, you would be absolutely crazy if you do not love cookie dough chunk puffs. It's one of the best bars that Built has got out there. And, again, if you participate, then you could have maybe gotten a free box of Built, or you could have maybe gotten a 12-month subscription to Built where your favorite bar puff was delivered right to your doorstep. And you got to remember, Built, they are much better than just the time throughout March Madness. They have got Built bars that you will want every single month of the year. They're jam-packed with protein, they're low in sugar content, covered in 100% real chocolate, and they got a variety of different flavors to choose from. So again, go to BuiltMarchMadness.com to see how you did in Built's March Madness bracket. And be sure to go grab a box while you're there. Built Bar is where tasty is the new healthy. Welcome back to this Tuesday edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, where we cover your South Carolina Gamecocks every single day. All right, let's talk about a portal defensive lineman who just visited the Gamecocks this past weekend and could help them in terms of their overall depth. And that lineman is Tank Booker, or Anthony Booker, from the Maryland Terrapins. And here's the thing. The Gamecocks pursuing Tank Booker shows that they're going after a guy who could specialize in helping this defense stop the run. And again, it could be a sign that maybe the 3-3-5 formation could be used more often by this coaching staff in 2023. Again, Tank Booker, as I mentioned a second ago, he did visit the Gamecocks this past weekend, and he confirmed this basically on social media when he quote tweeted a photo of the famous bar, the Cotton Gin, down in 5 Points, that does a lot of social media stuff in terms of changing up the signage and welcoming incoming football prospects to Columbia. And he quote tweeted that with a praying emoji, and basically, again, letting everybody know that he was indeed visiting South Carolina. Now, Tank Booker, he is a massive dude on the defensive line. He is listed at 6'4", 320 pounds, according to his player profile from Maryland's website. He played defensive tackle, of course, for the Terrapins over the past 4 years. His best year was this past year in 2022, a year where he tallied 25 total tackles, 4 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, and 2 forced fumbles. He has 2 years of eligibility remaining due to the COVID season that occurred, of course, in 2020. And when watching what I could find on YouTube of Tank Booker's game, Booker played a lot of defensive tackle out of a 4-2-5 formation. So this would not be a hard transition for him in terms of at least the formation aspect. The terminology might be a little bit different, but Booker would be able to come right into South Carolina, and he would be able to immediately provide significant snaps, especially in the interior on a 4-2-5, but could also maybe play some nose tackle out of the 3-3-5. Again, being listed at 6'4", 320, there's no question, even as one person going up against 3 guys in certain plays, he could pose a lot of problems for opposing SEC offensive linemen. Now, of course, South Carolina, they are not the only team that is going after Anthony Booker. Booker has also visited schools like Arkansas, Ohio State, Louisville, Purdue, and Texas A&M. So definitely getting some SEC and Big Ten interest here. But again, the Gamecocks getting him on campus is a good sign enough that he seems to have a high level interest here in Shane Beamer and South Carolina's football program. Now, what could help South Carolina here in this pursuit of Anthony Booker from Maryland? Well, the Gamecocks are slowly but surely developing a solid track record of developing defensive linemen and sending them on to the NFL. There was a little bit of a lull in the middle of the previous decade where South Carolina just wasn't doing a whole lot with developing defensive linemen for the next level, for the NFL. But they're starting to, again, build that back up. Kingsley Enagbare was drafted, I believe, in the 5th round of the 2022 NFL Draft. Javon Kinlaw, back in 2020, he was drafted in the 1st round by the San Francisco 49ers, was a dominant, strong run stuffer for the Gamecocks on the interior. And now, Zach Pickens is going to soon be the latest Gamecock defensive lineman to be drafted into the NFL. Here's the other thing. Again, I mentioned earlier, he could be a scheme fit in Clayton White's 4-2-5 defense and could be someone that fills in a massive need in terms of overall depth. Give this coaching staff some more flexibility with the guys they got on the roster already. And again, if they happen to play more in a 3-3-5, this is your bona fide nose tackle right here in Tank Booker. Now, admittedly, there are a couple things that could work against South Carolina. The first thing is this. Anthony Booker might not get as much playing time as he's looking for. Obviously, I mentioned everything about the 3-3-5 defense, but South Carolina's got plenty of solid interior defensive linemen in their 4-2-5 formation that have played a lot of snaps here in the SEC. So, in essence, Anthony Booker would not just come around in here and get a ton of snaps, at least in the Gamecocks' base defense as of this moment. So, it's not like he would maybe come here and start all 13 games or however many games the Gamecocks end up playing, of course. So, that could be something that could hurt them because with a guy like Anthony Booker who's played this many years in college football and is transferring somewhere else for the first time ever, typically they're looking for a chance to be able to make a lot of plays for their new team. And again, that could happen in one case, but it also could hurt him in other parts of this defense. The other thing is this. Anthony Booker is from Cincinnati, Ohio. I mentioned earlier, the Ohio State Buckeyes have already hosted him for a visit. He's already also visited some other programs like Purdue and Louisville, both of which are closer in proximity to his hometown compared to Columbia, South Carolina, per se. So, in essence, this is going to depend on sort of what Booker's prioritizing in his recruitment. If he's prioritizing development, going up against the very best that the sport has to offer, then it seems like that, Ohio State and South Carolina would be the two better options here, and maybe a Texas A&M as well. But South Carolina would be closer to home compared to Texas A&M. If he's looking to be closer to home, then Ohio State here, it would be a shocker, more than likely, if they did not land Tank Booker. So again, it's not a shoe-in that the Gamecocks are going to get Tank Booker, but it is clear that the Gamecocks, again, they are going after defensive linemen that can help them out in rush defense, guys that have experience, and again, could provide more depth to a unit that desperately needs to find ways to offer more flexibility to this coaching staff at this point in time. So, Tank Booker, a transfer portal defensive lineman to watch in the coming weeks for South Carolina football fans. Now, I just spent a lot of time talking about Tank Booker of the Maryland Terrapins, but he's not the only defensive line prospect that Shane Beamer and this coaching staff are currently pursuing, as the Gamecocks are actually getting ready to host another defensive line prospect for an official visit later on today, as Derrick McLendon II, an edge defender from Florida State, is getting ready to start that visit again today here in Columbia. And if he were to come to South Carolina, this is a guy that could be a likely day one starter for Clayton White's defense at the edge position. Now, again, this visit, it's been reported by GamecocksDigest's own Fisher Brewer, and there's probably already also a couple of other guys that have also reported on this as well. But Derrick McLendon, much like Anthony Booker, he's a guy that has slowly built up experience over the course of his college football career, and he had a career year this past fall. He recorded 37 total tackles, 5 tackles for loss, and 3.5 sacks in 12 starts. And when watching some of the highlights that McClendon had himself on YouTube, a little bit more than Tank Booker offered, This is a guy that is a high IQ defensive end. He has got a high motor in terms of his pass rush, with how active he is with his hands, and also just how good he is at knowing when to shed a block and sort of change his pass rushing lane to a quarterback that's maybe stepping up in the pocket. McClendon does a great job of that, but he also excels at setting the edge in terms of rush defense, doing a great job of forcing ball carriers back inside towards the middle of the defensive line and also towards his team's respective linebacker core. McClendon also was a guy that was able to make plays at times and completely be a play wrecker at the edge position in rush defense. And again, I saw multiple plays of this when watching some of his highlights on YouTube. So Derrick McLendon, much like Tank Booker, is another guy that, again, he's got valuable experience at the Power 5 level in college football. He is a guy that, in this case, would offer a little bit more in terms of his pass rushing ability, but also would be someone that could really help out this team in terms of rush defense. This was something that the Gamecocks defense struggled with on multiple occasions this past year, setting the edge at that defensive end spot. Because in terms of rush defense, every spot, of course, is important, but defensive end in particular is extremely important in terms of maintaining contain, holding on to your gap integrity, basically making sure that you don't either wash yourself out of the play or you get washed out of the play yourself by the opposing offensive lineman. South Carolina's Jordan Burch, he had some issues with this past season, and I'm not trying to disparage the young man, of course. He's already moved on to Eugene, Oregon, and is now playing for the Oregon Ducks this next season. But let's be honest, going back and watching some of the highlights from 2022, Jordan Burch was a guy that, as athletic as he was, and as good of a pass rusher as he was at times this past season, he struggled mightily at setting the edge, being able to diagnose sort of these option potential zone read plays in the offensive backfield. Derrick McLendon, in my opinion, based on the little bit I've seen on YouTube, some of the stuff I watched, I do not think he would have as much issue in terms of diagnosing what all's going on in the running game. And again, you add how active he is in pass rush. This is a guy that, again, with his experience in the Power 5 level or at the Power 5 level at Florida State, he could come right on into South Carolina and he would immediately start, in my opinion. He would absolutely provide a much needed boost to South Carolina's edge position. Now, of course, I guess the question based off of that would be, would he play the edge spot in South Carolina's 4-2-5 or be more of a weak side defensive end? I think that Derrick McLendon could play a little bit of either side, to be honest with you. I think he could flip-flop either or. But in terms of maybe his overall strength, admittedly, I would say that he would fit the edge position a little bit more. But as Shane Bieber mentioned in the clip that I played at the beginning of the show, he's all about getting the best 11 defenders on the field. So if they think that Jordan Stratton has recovered well enough from his ACL tear, that he can go out there and be productive for this defense, then he is one of the best two options for this defense. Then Jordan Stratton probably needs to play that edge spot because in terms of rush defense, there's times where admittedly he can get a touch overwhelmed because, again, he gives up a lot of size against some of these SEC offensive tackles. Derrick McLendon is not a guy that maybe have as much issue there. So if he and Jordan Stroud are both starting at that defensive end spot, expect McLendon, if he were to come to South Carolina, of course, in the first place, to be at that weak side defensive end spot. Kind of getting ahead of myself a little bit, to be honest with y'all. But my point is, I think y'all should get excited about these two prospects. I don't think that these are two guys that are essentially just hand-me-downs from, say, a group of 5 team. And the staff is just so desperate that at this point, they're just throwing darts or throwing rocks to different places, and they're hoping that it's going to hit some potential defensive end or defensive lineman that's looking to transfer somewhere else. These are two viable portal targets for Clayton White and this defensive coaching staff. And again, these will be two prospects to keep an eye on moving forward as we go throughout the spring. But with that being said, y'all, that is going to do it for today's show of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. I hope y'all thoroughly enjoyed today's show as always. What are your thoughts on South Carolina's sort of rush defense woes And what do you think they need to change in order to see more success in 2023? Do you think it's something that's scheme related? Do you think it's something maybe personnel related? Maybe it's execution that you have an issue with? Let me know your thoughts on that and the other topics I discussed on today's show down below in the comments section. If you watch today's show on YouTube, or if you listen to today's show on an audio podcast app, you can shoot me a direct message on Twitter at @aline_SC, and I'll try to respond to it as quickly as I see it. And once again, thank y'all so much for making Locked On Gamecocks your first listen or watch here today. For your next listen, check out Locked On College Basketball, as the Final Four just finished up, so experts Isaac Shade and Andy Patton are going to bring you everything you need to know, both on and off the court. Plus, you can hear from big-name experts, coaches, and players throughout the basketball landscape. Locked On College Basketball is available on YouTube and wherever you get your audio podcasts daily. But once again, that does it for me on today's show. Have a great rest of your Tuesday, and I will catch y'all on the next show of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast.